This session will introduce the basics of neurology. Here, Sam will discuss why pornography use isn't just a sinful behavior, it's a brain problem. Neuron patterns that are previously relied on become resistant to change. In understanding this, we realize that to act differently, a program must be instituted that spiritually deals with the whole of who we are. Thus, we need to expand how we believe God is interested in us. He cares about our physical, mental, emotional, and relational growth.
When I was 10, I remember coming out of our home in Florida and walking out on a beautiful sunshiny day, and my brother was leaning against his car and his friend was there with him, and they were looking at a magazine sideways, and that just didn't make any sense. How can you read sideways? And I asked them what they were looking at, and they turned it around. I could have stepped away, but I didn't. I stepped forward because every child is naturally curious about what the opposite sex looks like without clothes. That's a natural curiosity. But pornography has led so many children down destructive paths before adulthood. Multiple studies illustrate a sad reality. When children and adolescents view pornography over time, they are at greater risk of problematic porn use as adults. Early exposure is one of the building block behaviors for pornography struggles. Let's begin by exploring pornography's neurological impact. Graphic modern pornography commandeers the brain's neurology with what neurologists call supernormal stimuli. In basic scientific terms, supernormal stimuli are artificially enhanced. They subvert and hijack our natural appetites and motivational systems and overstimulate our neural pathways. In common terms, porn can light up a brain, including an unsuspecting and inexperienced child's brain. Since the 1950s, a myriad of studies by Nico Tinbergen and others have shown songbirds choosing to feed fake babies who had wider and redder mouths, peacocks preferring exaggerated dummies for mating, and butterflies trying to mate with bright cardboard replicas and ignoring other real butterflies. We see supernormal stimuli affecting people today as they choose saltier, sweeter, and fattier processed foods. Our senses are artificially stimulated far above what we find in nature. If those supernormal stimuli change behavior, they pale in comparison to today's pornography, which activates a fireworks-like show in the arousal and rewards systems of the brain. Seeing the supernormal stimulus of porn is compounded for children because they have more mirror neurons than adults, which helps them learn more quickly. Simply explained, mirror neurons allow you to see something and it feels like you're doing it. It's why you recoil when you see a batter get hit with a baseball, or your heart races when you see runners cross the finish line. Mirror neurons are at work when watching porn, and they help ignite the arousal and reward centers of the brain. Mirror neurons can make a child feel like he or she is part of the video being watched, and the child might mimic the behavior seen in porn even before the child's body is physically capable. There are several reasons why early porn exposure is so arresting or mesmerizing for kids. First, children are naturally curious about what the opposite sex looks like naked. This is normal, and it's common for children, boys and girls, to check each other out, and curiosity is typically where it ends when children see other children's undeveloped bodies. But when children see modern pornography, they not only see adult bodies, they often see explicit imagery and video of sexual acts. A child may know nothing or very little about sex, but imagery can naturally turn on neurobiological responses before they even understand what they are feeling. The event itself is traumatic, causing feelings of shock, fear, confusion, shame, embarrassment, and excitement. Faced with this stress, adrenaline and norepinephrine may be released. These neurochemicals make us more aware, but norepinephrine also acts as a hormone for sexual arousal and sexual memory. The child's natural curiosity is overwhelmed and traumatized by modern pornography, which is explicit, violent, and debasing. Children are startled and shocked by what they see, but they may also naturally be curious and want to see more. Now let's add to this conflict the neurochemical dopamine. Dopamine focuses attention, gives a spritz of reward that feels good, and helps us remember how to respond in the future. Dopamine loves new experiences and novelty. In addition, a young brain is in conflict. The conflict arises out of a more robust reward center versus an underdeveloped executive functioning. You might have heard of the marshmallow test, where a child is presented with a marshmallow. The child can choose to eat the marshmallow immediately for an instant reward, or he or she can wait for a period of time and receive extra marshmallows. Overwhelmingly, children who have not been trained to practice self-control gobble up the first marshmallow. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for managing control, making decisions, weighing risks, and making other executive decisions. But this prefrontal cortex, well, it doesn't fully develop until a person's mid-20s. Meanwhile, this limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, which is responsible for basic functions like hunger, thirst, anger, fear, and even sex, gets a big head start over the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system is sensitive to possibly rewarding behavior and impatient for the reward. It's also sensitive to adrenaline and sexual hormones and enjoys risk-taking behaviors. For example, car insurance for teens is more expensive because their brains are prone to enjoy risky driving behaviors and are more likely to fail at weighing the consequences of driving too fast. Let's put all this together for a child encountering pornography for the first time. A child who is naturally curious about what people look like without clothes sees the supernormal stimuli of today's pornography and receives a hit of dopamine, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. The child may feel shock, but also gets a surprising dose of good feelings within the reward center of the brain. Dopamine focuses their attention to the point of tunnel vision. Even if there is a part of him that says he should turn away, his limbic system is typically overpowered by his weaker prefrontal cortex. Dopamine, norepinephrine, and mirror neurons work together to solidify the memory of this porn exposure for future excursions. If you saw pornography as a child or adolescent, the odds that you would have turned away from it are exceedingly poor. Even if it shocked and repulsed you at first, it's no surprise that you returned to it. You should have been protected from ever seeing pornography. Unfortunately, in our culture, it's not if a child will be exposed to pornography, but when. The late sex addiction counselor Dr. Mark Laser called early exposure to pornography one of the building blocks of sexual addiction. These building blocks are so often collected while the human brain is still developing and more vulnerable. And because these issues and behaviors develop early, they become deeply rooted in how we think, what we find exciting, and how we react to any number of stressors and scenarios. Dr. Laser said building block behaviors form a foundation upon which other sexual behaviors are built. Because these behaviors develop so early and are so basic, they are among the hardest forms of sexual addiction to recover from. So we've covered a lot of detail here. Why is it so important? Why is it so impactful? And I think we need to think about two reasons very specifically. One, our local churches must be engaged in helping parents protect their kids. We must do a better job of equipping our families to protect children from today's pornography. But number two is we've seen how impactful that is, how pornography is to the adult brain. When they have gone from childhood and into adulthood watching pornography, we need to have some empathy and understanding of just how they have been ensnared and trapped. How difficult this must be for them to begin finding true freedom. So we've uncovered some deep details here. Why is this important? Why does it really matter? Well, let me give you two stories that kind of illustrate why we need to be thinking about the importance and impact of early exposure to pornography for children. I was invited to speak at a church where the pastor said, "I'm supposed to be already retired, Sam, but the pastor who is going to co-pastor with me was found to be struggling with pornography. And so he was disqualified from his work in ministry." But then he paused and said to me, "Sam, this pastor said that he first saw pornography at 8 years old. Would that have had any impact on him?" See, these are the very basic questions we need to be asking. Another ministry couple were talking about working with a young man who was struggling with pornography, and it turns out that he'd actually, in the basement of his church where his mom was a secretary and where he spent many hours alone and sort of isolated, that on a computer in the basement of the church, that is where he first saw pornography and could return to it again and again in the church basement. And the ministry leader, though, said, "I'm sorry that happened to him at 9 years old, but he's a grown man now. Shouldn't he just get over it?" One of the questions that you should be asking someone who's struggling with pornography is, tell me a story about the first time that you saw pornography. And likely they're going to tell you a story from their childhood.